What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected and dignified actors sits down for what should be a routine promotional interview, only to find himself under attack from daytime television's most aggressive host? The legendary Denzel Washington, known for his commanding presence and unwavering principles, walked onto the set expecting to discuss his latest project, but instead found himself facing off against Behar's relentless questioning that pushed the Academy Award winner beyond his breaking point. What started as typical Hollywood promotional banter quickly spiraled into a fiery argument that had audience members stunned and fellow co-hosts scrambling to contain the situation. The tension became so unbearable that Washington did something unprecedented in his decades-long career, something that left millions of viewers absolutely speechless. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this explosive showdown will leave you questioning how far daytime television has fallen. You're about to witness one of the most shocking and disrespectful moments in daytime television history. Denzel Washington, a man whose commanding presence and unwavering dignity have made him one of Hollywood's most revered figures, was about to face something that would test every ounce of his legendary composure. The two-time Academy Award winner who has navigated decades of interviews with grace and wisdom, who has earned the respect of peers and audiences alike through his powerful performances and principled character, was about to encounter a host who seemed determined to tear down everything he represents. For over 4 decades, Denzel Washington has been the gold standard of Hollywood excellence. He's handled challenging questions with thoughtful responses, faced difficult topics with nuanced intelligence, and always maintained the kind of dignity that has made him a role model for generations of actors and fans. But on this particular morning at the View studio, Washington would face a different kind of challenge entirely. This wasn't going to be about his craft, his latest directorial effort, or even his incredible journey from young actor to Hollywood legend. This was going to be a calculated assault on his character, his choices, and his very right to hold the moral authority he had earned through decades of exemplary work. What you're about to see isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a masterclass in how quickly respect can be abandoned when someone decides that attacking a beloved figure makes for compelling television. The man who gave us Malcolm X, who has portrayed presidents and prophets with equal dignity, was about to show a side of himself that even his most devoted fans had never witnessed before. The View studio had hosted countless Hollywood legends over the years, but what was about to happen to Denzel Washington would go down as one of the most unnecessarily disrespectful moments in television history. Trust me, after witnessing this explosive confrontation, you'll never look at the boundaries of celebrity journalism the same way again. The morning sun streamed through the windows of ABC's Manhattan studios as Denzel Washington arrived with his characteristic quiet dignity and commanding presence. The legendary actor moved through the backstage corridors with that unmistakable grace that had made him one of Hollywood's most respected figures, greeting each crew member with genuine warmth and the kind of respectful professionalism that had defined his 4-decade career. "Good morning, everyone," he said in that distinctive voice that had captivated audiences for generations, stopping to shake hands with a young production assistant who looked starstruck. "Thank you for having me here today. I appreciate all the hard work you do to make these shows happen." His publicist walked alongside him, reviewing the standard talking points about his latest directorial project. "Denzel, they're really excited to have you. Just focus on the film, maybe share some insights about working behind the camera, and you know how much they respect your perspective on the craft." Washington nodded thoughtfully, his eyes reflecting the intelligence and depth that had made him one of cinema's most compelling performers. "It's always a pleasure to discuss the work. That's what this is all about, the storytelling, the collaboration, the opportunity to move people." The makeup artist worked quietly and efficiently, clearly in awe of the Hollywood legend sitting in her chair. "Mr. Washington, it's such an honor to work with you. Your films have meant so much to so many people." "That's very kind of you to say," he replied with that genuine humility that had endeared him to colleagues throughout the industry. "I've been blessed to work with incredible people who've made me better." The studio erupted in respectful, almost reverent applause as Washington made his entrance. His dignified presence immediately elevated the atmosphere as he settled into the guest chair with that quiet authority that commanded respect without demanding it. The hosts beamed with obvious honor at having such a distinguished guest, and everything felt perfectly aligned for another classic Denzel Washington promotional appearance. But Joy Behar sat quietly in her chair, watching with an expression that suggested she had something far more confrontational in mind. "So, Denzel," Whoopi began with obvious reverence, "tell us about stepping behind the camera again. What drew you to direct this particular story?" Washington's face took on that thoughtful expression that had made him one of Hollywood's most compelling interview subjects. He leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying the weight of experience and genuine passion for his craft. "Whoopi, it's a story that needed to be told," he said with that distinctive gravitas that commanded attention. "When I read the script, I knew this was something that could speak to people across all walks of life. It's about redemption, about second chances, about the power of human connection in the face of adversity." The audience listened with rapt attention, clearly captivated by his eloquent and heartfelt description. His hands moved with measured gestures as he painted a picture of the creative process, the collaborative effort, and the deeper meaning behind the work. "And working with this cast was extraordinary," he continued, his voice warming with genuine appreciation. "Every single person brought something special to the table. That's what I love about this business. When everyone is committed to serving the story, magic happens." Throughout this thoughtful discussion, Joy Behar had remained conspicuously silent, while the other hosts leaned in with obvious respect, nodding appreciatively at Washington's insights. Joy sat back with her arms folded, studying him with an intensity that seemed oddly calculating for such a respectful conversation. Finally, after several minutes of dignified storytelling, Joy shifted forward in her chair. The movement was subtle, but it immediately changed the energy in the room. Washington paused, his seasoned instincts picking up on the shift, and the other hosts grew noticeably quieter. "Denzel," Joy said, her voice carrying a coolness that cut through the warm atmosphere like a blade, "I have to ask you about something that's been on my mind. Over the years, we've seen your views on certain social and political issues evolve. Some people are wondering if you've been too quiet, too careful with your platform. Don't you think someone with your influence has a responsibility to be more vocal about the issues that matter?" The studio temperature seemed to drop several degrees, and Washington's thoughtful expression shifted to something more guarded and cautious. Washington's legendary composure remained intact, but there was a subtle shift in his posture as he processed Joy's pointed question. His voice, when he responded, carried that measured tone that had served him well through decades of navigating Hollywood's complex political landscape. "Joy, I think you might be misunderstanding my approach," he replied carefully, his dignity intact but with a new wariness in his eyes. "I've always believed that my responsibility is to tell truthful stories, to portray characters with honesty and depth. I let my work speak for my values rather than using every platform as a political podium." Joy sensed she had found her opening and pressed forward with the aggressive instinct of someone who had identified a target. Her voice took on a sharper edge as she leaned into what was clearly becoming an interrogation rather than an interview. "But Denzel, don't you think that's a luxury that someone in your position can't afford anymore?" she continued, her tone growing more confrontational. "When you have the platform you have, when you're looked up to by so many people, especially in the Black community, isn't silence on critical issues actually a form of complicity?" The other hosts exchanged deeply uncomfortable glances, clearly recognizing that Joy was venturing into territory that went far beyond typical promotional interview boundaries. Sarah attempted a nervous smile, but Joy's focus remained laser-locked on Washington. Washington's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his legendary self-control being tested in a way that was clearly unprecedented in his media experience. "Joy, I think you're conflating silence with thoughtfulness. I've never been silent about issues that matter. I've chosen to address them through my work, through my choices, through the stories I tell." The studio audience could feel the tension building as the respectful promotional atmosphere rapidly dissolved into something much more combative and personal. Joy's predatory smile suggested she was just getting started with her ideological assault. Joy's eyes gleamed with something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction as she prepared to launch her most devastating attack yet. The pretense of discussing Washington's directorial work had been completely abandoned, and everyone in the studio could sense that something far more personal and vicious was about to unfold. "Denzel, let's talk about something that really concerns me," Joy said, her voice taking on a tone that made several audience members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Some of your past film choices have been problematic. Playing these strong, stoic characters, don't you think you've been complicit in perpetuating harmful stereotypes about black masculinity? Don't you think your influence has actually done damage to the very community you claim to represent?" The question hit the studio like a physical blow. The other hosts' faces showed immediate shock, and even the camera operators seemed to freeze. This was the kind of ideological attack that crossed every professional boundary, weaponizing Washington's life's work against him in the most personal way possible. Washington's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The thoughtful composure vanished, replaced by something much more intense and protective. His voice, when he spoke, carried a tremor of genuine anger that suggested Joy had just attacked something sacred. "Joy, you're questioning 40 years of my life's work," he said, his voice steady but filled with barely contained fury. "You're taking roles that I chose carefully, characters that I brought dignity and depth to, and you're reducing them to harmful stereotypes. That's not criticism, that's character assassination." But Joy had clearly decided that respect for his legacy was irrelevant to good television. She leaned forward even more aggressively, her voice rising with what seemed like manufactured righteous indignation. "When you consistently play these one-dimensional strongman roles, when you refuse to show vulnerability or complexity, aren't you telling young black men that this is how they have to be? Isn't that a form of harm disguised as entertainment?" The studio audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what felt less like journalism and more like a public trial of Hollywood royalty. What happened next would become one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime television history. Joy's attack on Washington's legacy and artistic choices had pushed Hollywood royalty past every boundary of professional respect, and the dignity that had defined his career was about to transform into something far more fierce and protective. "Joy, what you're doing right now isn't journalism. It's intellectual vandalism," Washington fired back, his voice rising with an intensity that shocked everyone in the studio. "You're taking characters I've spent decades crafting with care and respect, and you're twisting them into weapons to attack me. That's not analysis, that's destruction." Joy's face flushed with anger as she shot up from her chair, clearly relishing the explosive confrontation she had successfully orchestrated. "Destruction? Denzel, I'm asking you to take responsibility for the impact of your choices. When you consistently portray these limited versions of black manhood, you're influencing how an entire generation sees themselves." Washington rose to meet her challenge, his commanding presence filling the entire studio with an authority that was both magnetic and intimidating. "Limited versions? You think Malcolm X was limited? You think my portrayal of coaches, fathers, and leaders showed no complexity? You're reducing my entire body of work to fit your narrow worldview." The other hosts were completely paralyzed, afraid to intervene in what had become an all-out war between a television host and Hollywood legend. The studio audience watched in horrified fascination as the confrontation escalated beyond anything they had ever witnessed. "Your legacy is built on outdated ideas about what strength looks like," Joy shot back, her voice cracking with what seemed like genuine conviction. "And now you're too proud to admit that maybe, just maybe, you could have done better." The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what would become the most uncomfortable and personally devastating exchange in The View's history. The silence that followed Joy's devastating attack on Washington's legacy felt like it stretched on for an eternity. The legendary actor stood there, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths, his decades of professional dignity hanging by the thinnest of threads. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet intensity that made everyone in the studio understand they were witnessing something unprecedented. "Joy, you just crossed a line that reveals everything about who you are," he said, his words cutting through the studio like a sword. "You've taken a lifetime of work that I've poured my heart and soul into, and you've twisted it into something ugly because it serves your agenda. That's not journalism. That's vandalism of the highest order." Joy realized she had pushed too far, but instead of backing down, she made one final, desperate attack. "Denzel, I'm just asking you to acknowledge that maybe your approach hasn't been perfect, that maybe you could have used your platform more responsibly." Responsibly? Washington's voice exploded through the studio with a force that made everyone flinch. "You want to lecture me about responsibility? You're sitting here tearing down 40 years of work that has inspired millions of people, that has told important stories, that has opened doors for countless actors who came after me. And you call that responsible?" He began removing his microphone with deliberate, controlled movements, each action a clear statement that this conversation was over. Joy watched in growing panic as she realized her attack had backfired spectacularly. "You can't just walk away when someone challenges your choices," she called out desperately, her voice rising to almost a shriek. Washington turned to face her one final time, and the look in his eyes was one of complete disgust mixed with profound disappointment. "I'm not walking away from a challenge, Joy. I'm walking away from someone who has confused destruction with dialogue." With that, Denzel Washington left the set with the same dignity he had brought to every role, every interview, and every moment of his legendary career, leaving Joy standing alone in the wreckage of what had once been a respectful television studio. The silence that engulfed the View studio after Denzel Washington's dignified exit was unlike anything the crew had ever experienced. It was the kind of profound, uncomfortable quiet that follows a sacrilege, when everyone present realizes they've just witnessed something that should never have happened. The only sounds were the mechanical hum of cameras still rolling and the shocked whispers of audience members who couldn't believe what had just been done to Hollywood royalty. Joy stood frozen in place, her face cycling through expressions of defiance, confusion, and something that might have been the dawning realization of what she had just destroyed. When she finally spoke, her voice lacked its earlier aggression, replaced by something that sounded almost desperate. "Well," she said, attempting to regain control of the narrative, "I think that reaction shows exactly why these conversations need to happen. Some people can't handle being held accountable for their choices." But the other hosts' faces told a completely different story. Whoopi looked genuinely horrified, her expression suggesting she couldn't believe what had just happened to a man she clearly respected. Sarah appeared close to tears, and even Sonny seemed shaken by the unprecedented assault they had just witnessed on one of Hollywood's most beloved figures. The studio audience sat in stunned disbelief, many shaking their heads in obvious disgust at what had transpired. Several audience members could be heard whispering, "How dare she?" And that was completely wrong, their voices carrying clearly in the unnaturally quiet studio. The production crew stood frozen, knowing they had just captured something that would be remembered as one of the most disrespectful moments in television history. This wasn't just a bad interview. This was the moment when basic respect for artistic legacy was sacrificed for manufactured controversy. What you just witnessed wasn't accountability. It was the systematic destruction of a Hollywood legend's reputation, and Denzel Washington's departure from that studio wasn't just an exit. It was a statement about dignity that will be remembered long after the cameras stopped rolling. And that's how Hollywood royalty went from honored guest to victim of ideological assault in less than 20 minutes. All because Joy Behar decided that attacking Denzel Washington's 4-decade legacy was more important than showing basic respect to one of cinema's greatest artists. Washington's departure from that studio wasn't just a walkout. It was a masterclass in maintaining dignity when faced with calculated disrespect. The question is, do you think Joy was justified in challenging Washington's artistic choices, Or did she cross the line into destroying a beloved legend's reputation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe for more moments that expose how far daytime television has fallen. Until next time, remember, true legends deserve respect, not destruction.